Hey everybody, it's Ricky Heller from rickyheller.com. I am a writer, book coach, and editor, and I help you discover what it is you want to say in your book, then write it so you can finally get your message out and share it with the world. And today I want to talk a little bit more about, I've been discussing sort of what it is that I do and how we could work together. I've been getting some questions around developmental editing over the past few months because I think developmental editing is a term that is pretty well known to people in the world of fiction. It's a part of writing a novel and has been for a long time. But only in recent years has developmental editing become part of the nonfiction writing process. And I feel that it is an absolutely essential part, obviously, because it's what I do. And I feel that that's part of the reason I went into this field, because it's so important. When I wrote my 4 nonfiction books, except for the one that was self-published. So for 3 of those books where I worked with publishers, I had a developmental editor assigned to my book in each case, and they were all nonfiction. So let me tell you a little bit more about the process and what's involved and what would happen if we were to work together. And if you have any other questions, if there's something I didn't cover here that you want to know, then just leave a comment below, and I will absolutely get back to you as soon as possible and answer all questions. So there are basically 2 parts to the developmental edit. There's the part that I kind of do on my own, and then there's the part that we do together, where we meet together. So this is really something for a person who has a written manuscript. So you've already written your manuscript and it's either complete or very nearly complete. And you're looking to ensure that the structure is optimal, that it's put together in a way such that it's going to affect the reader in the best way possible. They're going to be able to read it. It's going to feel like a clear, easy read where they understand everything in the book, and the impact that you want that book to have is going to be as strong as possible. You're going to reach maximum impact with your readers just based on the way the book is put together. So when we start and you hand over your manuscript to me, the first thing I do is a very deep dive read of every single word in that manuscript. So I will go through the manuscript page by page, and I will make my notes and I will make my observations so that I can then deliver what's called an editor's letter to you. So the editor's letter, I'll just set aside for a moment, but here's what I do in constructing that editor's letter. The developmental edit looks at, if you think of overall structure of the book. So I'm taking a very general look. This is not the kind of editing that you might be familiar with, copy editing, where someone is looking at the book sentence by sentence, looking for structure of the sentences, grammatical errors, spelling errors, that kind of thing. What developmental editing does is it takes a much broader look at the writing. So I will examine, how is it structured? What about the organization of the material? Are things in an order such that they will be most effective? Does it make logical sense to move from chapter 1 to chapter 2 to chapter 3 and so on, so that the flow, or what we call the narrative flow, works optimally? I will also look for things like omissions. Are there areas where logically something seems to be missing and it doesn't make sense to the reader, or where you need to add more information for clarity? Are there areas where perhaps it's redundant, or there is excessive information that isn't necessary or doesn't necessarily belong in the book, and maybe the book would be clearer without it, that it's starting to become too full of illustrations or ideas or excess information that isn't right on target with the message of the book? Because what often happens with, I find, particularly first-time writers, and I'm certainly guilty of this myself, we don't know if we're going to write another book, whether consciously or not. And so we try to just put everything that we've got into that book. And sometimes that's not best for the book, and that's not best for the readers. So we want to be sure that what's in there really works, and that there's nothing extra, and that there's nothing missing. So that's what I do in terms of developmental edits. And a couple of the other things I look at are things like the voice in the book. So when you think of your author's voice, that's the voice in our head as we're reading it. What do we hear? Does it sound like you? First and foremost, is it authentic to who you are? And also, is it appropriate for the subject matter? Is it appropriate for the readers? So are we a little too formal? Are we a little too informal? Are we right on track? And are we consistent from beginning to end? If it's a book that's written in a fairly informal style, is that style consistent through the whole book? Or are there places where we might fall back into academic jargon or whatever the jargon is of our particular field? So a developmental editor can help you with that as well. And like I said, the idea is that I'm kind of taking an aerial view. I'm looking at overall patterns and structure. And this is something that is very difficult to do objectively in your own writing, because as much as I'm able to do it for other people, I'm not really able to do it for myself. When I worked with a developmental editor, I've written 4 books now. And when I worked with a developmental editor on my 4th book, she was still, it was so helpful to have her feedback because she was able to see things that I could not. I was so deeply entrenched in the material, and I wasn't able to stand back and take that objective aerial view of the work. So that's what a developmental editor does in terms of assessing and providing feedback. And so when I'm working on your book, I will do all of those things, and I will keep a detailed record. And then I'm going to convert my notes into what's called an editor's letter. That's the second part of what I do. And that is a detailed, really, it's a document. It's anywhere usually from 10 to 20 pages long, where we go through the book chapter by chapter, and I provide very detailed, specific feedback about what I felt worked well, what I felt could be changed, what I felt you might add, omit, and so on. All the things I just talked about, I'm going to give you that specific feedback in a separate document. And I'm also going to make notes throughout the manuscript so that you can look directly on the manuscript, see comments on the sidebar, and connect those back to the editor's letter. So one thing to keep in mind, so that you will get that at the midpoint of our work together. So in a developmental edit, we start out, you provide the manuscript to me, the editor. About midway through our work together, I will provide the editor's letter back to you with your manuscript full of my notes. And then you'll have some time to go over that, digest it, ruminate over it. As always, it's really important to remember, especially if you're doing this as an independent, self-published author, all of the people who work with you are really there to provide their best suggestions and feedback, but the ultimate choice is always, always yours. So based on the editor's letter, whatever you feel works, you might decide to make changes, you might decide not to, depending on what works for you. But that's why I always build in a first meeting after you've had a chance to read the editor's letter. We have a live meeting together where we discuss it all. And if you are feeling hesitant about something, or if you feel something just absolutely doesn't work for you, we have a chance to discuss it. I can explain why I said the things I said. You have a chance to consider that for a second time, and then ultimately decide what it is you want to do with that. So at that point, once you're sure on the direction you want to go based on those suggestions and on my feedback, you can then edit the manuscript. And we would have a second live meeting scheduled once those edits are done and you've sent them to me, for us to just wrap up, discuss any final changes. And I might send you some, a few more notes after that, just to create closure and wrap everything up. So ultimately you have the suggestions and feedback in a very detailed editor's letter, all of the notes in the manuscript, which I use something called track changes that shows the notes right on the page. You can accept those or not as you go. And we're going to have 2 live meetings to discuss all of this stuff before you make the final changes to the manuscript. At that point, in my assessment, you are ready to get into the publishing phase. You would need a proofreader, and you'd be pretty much ready to go to get the book into hard copy, if you like, published, or digital copy online, however you decide to publish the book. And that will ensure that your book is ready for the public. It's ready for your readers in a way that's going to best resonate with your audience, so that people will be ready and receptive to your book and your book's message. So I hope that helps. Again, let me know if you have any questions, if there's anything that isn't clear here, if you'd like more information, if you'd like to talk about how we could potentially work together. You can send me an email at ricky@rickyheller.com, or just click the link in the show notes below and set up a free call, a free clarity call, where we'll talk about what we could do together. I'll learn more about your book and see if we'd be a good fit to work together. And if not, I am happy to recommend someone else as best I can for you. I would never want to work with someone if I didn't feel it was a good fit and that we weren't going to both get the absolute best outcomes possible for you. All right, everybody, thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time.